Hallo iedereen, het is heel fijn dat we samen naar Costa, Brava, Lebanon hebben kunnen kijken. Ik heb het geluk om Mounia, de regisseur, een paar vragen te mogen stellen. So, hi Mounia, how are you today?
I'm good, and you?
Very good, especially now I can talk to you. I'm very happy we can have this conversation. I really liked the movie. I thought it was very poetic and pure and tender as well. And I read somewhere that you said, growing up in Lebanon, I was surrounded by chaos and poetry. And I was wondering if you could explain how that influenced the film you've made.
Yes. You know, like growing up in a place like Lebanon means that things don't function in a way that is, that has any rhythm that is safe and calm. Any day can predict something that you had not expected at all. And I think that in many ways defined a little bit how I am. Also, I can't speak for all Lebanese people, but for me, my ability to adapt to certain situations, but also the state of where you feel like you can't completely create because or just exist in a normal way because your life is somehow threatened from different areas all the time. So it created in me, I think, this feeling of really loving the people around me, holding on to that, and also like trying to live every day as if it was the last. I think that's what it did to me as a young person. It changed later for sure, but I will say that the way it influenced the film is that I wanted to, through this family, explore how this outside pressure, which is this constant threat, whatever form it comes in, brings out the demons in people because they're constantly on the edge and vulnerable and hypersensitive because of the context.
Mm-hmm. And how does it play out in the movie? Is this the pressure the characters feel? Does this pressure of this garbage bring out all the demons in them, like you said?
Yes, I think the arrival of the garbage in this case, the outside world, this corrupt government that exploits and holds its people hostage. In this case, it awakes in each character something different because, of course, for the teenager, she's not as aware because she's been so sheltered all her life. She's not aware that this person who's her love interest represents that corruption. So she sees him as a person that becomes a space in which her coming of age can exist, a space where she's not in an open air prison, a place where this young woman can just discover herself without the pressure that she's been in. And throughout the film, I try to talk about this bubble that those parents have created for their children, which is this bubble of privilege, of denial that is also linked to their own story and how it starts exploding. For example, for the kid, the arrival of the garbage is what ultimately makes her want to discover the world and separate from how the fear her father has instated with the world. But for the parents also, it's trauma. It's not wanting to be part of a city that broke their hearts. And in their case, being able to do that. Today in Lebanon, it would be hard to do that because the situation has degraded so much that the situation of the family is almost impossible to achieve today because the sadness has become internal to people's homes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's interesting that everything has become internal. Maybe we can come back to it later. Of course, this is a film about garbage. The garbage is everywhere. The plastic bags, but most of all, it's a film about family. And I think the garbage puts a lot of pressure on those family ties. And I've loved the way how you've portrayed all of the family members, especially the relationship of Alit and Suraya. I thought was very beautiful. And I was wondering, how did these characters come about, the mother and the father, the lovers?
Yes. There's not one moment. I feel like characters like are dormant in you until they become on paper. And I think in many ways, ever since I started writing, because after I studied architecture school, I I studied filmmaking. I think every character I've been writing since the beginning was somehow a version of Walid or a version of Suraya, and because each member of this family is some of the thoughts that that are, you know, inside of me. It's so each of them represents something that has been active in me for a long time, and I think with Suraya, I wanted to talk about this toxic relationship we have to our country that's almost sometimes so toxic that it's naive also, you know, this nostalgia, which is such a big liar. And with Walid, I wanted to talk about the fear that gets instated after trauma, and which is because he's a man that's really driven by fear, and this is something that I can understand more now after the explosion than before. But these are two characters that I wanted to explore because they both represent different questions I have when it comes to that question in Lebanon, which is, where do you go when you don't feel safe at home anymore? And through those two, I try to talk about this dramatic question that's part of our lives. And I think also, for example, through the character of Reem, which is the product of Walid and Suraya, I wanted to talk about what we've inherited from our parents. In this case, she's inherited, I was born in 89, so I didn't live the war. I was in my mother's womb when it happened, but it's only later that I understood that I had inherited the trauma that my parents had endured. And I wanted, through Reem and her relationship to obsessive compulsive disorder, talk about that. So it's, so I'm yeah.
Yeah, there was another thing I wanted to ask you. It shows that Reem is really struggling to grasp reality, and she wants to take control of the situation by counting and by probably other things. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, why was it so important to you to work that into the film? Because I haven't really seen that a lot in films, that you see these small children really struggling and counting the way she does, which is probably tells more about me than about the films that are made. But still, I was wondering why that was so important to you. Is this a link to the trauma?
Absolutely. I think Reem's obsession with her father and love for her father doesn't cancel the fact that she's inherited from him this desire to control everything, which is linked to his fear, because this is a man who's lost so much and who has made his daughter believe that the world outside this fence is dangerous, because that is what he thinks. So she's a little soldier, defender of this kingdom, that thinks that we think that she's this girl who's totally free, in touch with nature and harmony with, but actually she's just the product of fear and of trauma. And she is trying to control everything through her counting, until she realizes that she can't, and that she maybe has to face the world that she's been protected from. But yeah, I think it was my way to talk about the anxiety we inherit, the anxiety that also can turn into imagination. I know that, for example, there was one year in my life where I had OCD, and of course it was linked to an event. And I remember that this phase that kind of isolated me from my friends, because the nature of my OCD was even more violent than the one of Reem. It was really taking over a lot. Maybe I was too nice with the one of Reem, and that's one regret I have. But it isolated me from my friends, and therefore it helped my imagination expand, because it was this phase in my life where I had a lot of time with myself. And so in a way, that anxiety gave birth to something creative. It's not at all always the case. Sometimes it's just crippling. But I think that for Reem, the moment she realizes that her counting doesn't work anymore is the moment she understands that the world is more complicated than her father has made it seem.
Yeah, that's interesting. I really like him. I really like the thought. Another thing I wanted to ask you, and maybe we can link this to what you've just said, is that Walid and Soraya, they really have different reactions to the garbage crisis. Soraya misses the city, and I think she doesn't, more than the city, she misses the person she was when she lived in the city. And Walid, just out of fear, wants to protect his family. And the out of fear, I guess they make something very beautiful, the mountain in no, the home in the mountains. But during the film, you realize it's more like an open air prison, like you've just said. Could you just tell us something more about that, about the turning point? Or
Yes. Yeah, because this couple decides that to try to protect their children from what they have endured, they're going to try to create this self-sustainable exile where they teach their kids a way of living that is more in harmony with nature, but also that's a good thing, but also in their case, that is triggered by a rejection of a city after repetitive traumas. So in a way, what could seem like a beautiful integration into nature evolves into a total isolation from the world and disconnect from the world. And their relationship to their country and to the protests that are happening at that moment are through TV and radio. And so I think Suraya's guilt at that moment is to not be part of that and to take part in that. But actually, Walid loves Beirut more than ever and has shed so much blood for it that he has turned into this cynical, broken soul that doesn't want to go see the thing he loves the most be completely destroyed. But I think at the end, what happens to him is that thanks to his daughter, who's the only person that can get him out of there, he decides to face it and to break that. And yeah, so I wanted to use this bubble, which is the mountains, as this little microcosm that represents a little bit how we deal with our desire to escape our feelings or situations that feel desperate and tragic.
mm-hmm. You've talked before about how this is a dystopian film, but how reality catched up on you.
Yeah.
Why did you want to make a dystopian film?
When I wrote my the short film Submarine, you know, I never worked with one genre. Like I because there's a lot of directors that just evolve and grow with one genre. I think for me, you're like in architecture, form follows function, like which I heard so many times in architecture school. I think that got embedded in my mind in a sense that I think the story defines the genre it should be told, at least for me. And for example, when I started, I did cheesy rom-coms that I cringe when I watch them now, but that's probably how I felt then. And then later I did something. So basically everything I've done has somehow been a mirror of how I see the world at the moment, whether I shot in New York or in London or in Beirut. And when I wrote Submarine, the short film, which was a bridge to Costa Brava, the feature, I imagined, so it was a 2016, it was after the garbage crisis. And I remember being in the city during the protests, seeing my favorite landscapes be completely destroyed, which was also just another reminder of how corrupt the system of the country I live in is. Not that other countries are, but you know what I'm saying. And so I think that was a moment where I understood what my biggest fears were. And I decided with Submarine, what if I made my biggest fears a reality in a film? And that's how the dystopian genre was born. So it was a film in which I imagined the dystopian 2030, where the whole country had been ravaged by corruption and environmental disasters and pandemic and epidemics, and everyone would be wearing a mask. It's crazy. The day you watch Submarine, the genre has disappeared. But so, and in Submarine, the storyline was that every single Lebanese person had decided to leave the country, except for one woman who's trying to keep them from doing so. And so it was my way of, like, the anticipation genre was my way of putting my biggest fears on the screen to help me ask questions about them, or also to just think to myself, well, that's what could happen if the worst comes to worst. and Costa Brava was in that same genre. But then from the moment I shot Submarine to the moment I shot Costa Brava, with the Beirut explosion, the inflation, everything that happened in the country situation became much worse than the dystopia I imagined.
Mhm.
And add to that, that the world was experiencing, like, going through the whole pandemic. So the mask and the pandemic imagery was one of the present day. So I simply just removed the header that said 2030 and didn't do much changes, because unfortunately the reality was very close to that dystopia.
Okay. I also read somewhere that you were discussing the film with the producer when the explosion happened.
Yes,
Is
we
that
were in
true?
the office of Abood, which is the production company that produced the film. We were there with the production team, and the explosion happened, and we were at the heart of Beirut. So it was one moment where our lives, in a split of a second, went from, a creative meeting in the middle of a pandemic and a country that's not doing well, to looking for each other in a destroyed city that looked nothing like we know, and being at the heart of so much evil and pain and grief. And I think that I'm grateful we were together at that moment, because we stood up for each other and supported each other. But yes, that was, I think, for many Lebanese people there, or at least for me, I feel like there's Mounia before August 4th and Mounia after.
Mhm. Okay. I think it's so special and weird, and I don't know which English word I should put on this emotion I feel, but it's so crazy that you could just remove 2030 from the header, and
Yes.
it's
Yeah, actually the collapse of the country happened so fast, even though it had been, when things happen this fast, it means they've been, everything was leading to that. Every prediction was leading to that, because the country is run by corruption, and so it's just, yeah, it's very hard to feel like you're constantly grieving your city, but at the same time, so many Lebanese people are working so hard to give hope to those who are hopeless. And so I think a lot of us are putting a lot of our hopes into the upcoming elections, so that we can at least take a first step into electing people that can represent us.
Mhm. I feel like your film is also hopeful. You see how this family is trying so hard to keep the unit together and to keep the ties close, but then they seem to realize that when you let go, something new and something beautiful can exist.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I think I am a hopeful person. I'm very cynical, of course, as we all should be a little bit. But I'm also, I think it's Wim Wenders who once said that I forgot what it was exactly, but he was talking about the importance of having somehow at the end of a film, a promise of change, at least a promise that something could possibly change. And I think I'm like that in people. I always feel like people can change and things can change, whether it's going to take centuries or an hour. I think that at the end of this film, I wanted to end on the face of this little girl in movement in this car, heading to the city that she's always been trying to avoid, and deciding to face it and to somehow integrate it. And yes, there's fear in her eyes, and she's confused and trapped and lost, but at the same time, there is a promise of change as this girl. And also, like, you can also see it as a very sad or hopeless ending, in a sense that, like, we only have each other but the world is falling apart. But I think in my case, I think that Reem understood that for her to be happy, she needs to define her own world and not stick to the definition that's been imposed on her. But also that for her family to be happy, they don't necessarily need to be in this house, but somehow, and not necessarily together, but at least in a place where people are listening to the other person's truth and not trying to define each other's lives.
I have one more question for you. And it's about the casting process and how much I found Walid a very interesting character. I absolutely love the female roles in this film. Soraya, Tala, the grandmother, even Walid's sister. I think they're all very wonderful and complex characters. And I was wondering, how did the casting process come about?
It was quite scary because everyone in the team said, if we don't have the perfect family, it's going to be a shit show because so much of the film lies on this family. And it's not about getting good actors. It's about getting people who also will, that vibrate the same energy and that be a family. And so Saleh, the father, I wrote the role for him because I met him a few years ago. I always skip the two COVID years. I met him at the Dubai Film Festival. He was in the jury for the feature films, and I was there with Submarine, the short film. He watched it and loved it, and I had loved his work. Growing up, he was an actor I had followed a lot, him and his family, and we really got along. We became friends, and then we wished to work together. And then a couple of years later, I was writing the role for him without realizing. I was describing the character and having him speak in ways I had heard Saleh speak. And then I told him, after I wrote it, I told him, by the way, I wrote the role for you. And he was very happy and grateful. And I was very grateful as well. Then for the kids, so Nadine, I shared with her the script after it was written, and a very long conversation with her. And I kind of confirmed to both of us that we wanted to do this together. Nadine, as a director, felt like she needed to kind of like lose herself in a role and step away from what defined her life otherwise, which is her as a director or her as a mother. It was like a little escape for her as a woman to travel and be Suraya, which she also found a lot of common points with. And for the kids, so the grandmother is not an actress, she's the mother of a friend of mine, Shireen. And it was her first film, and it was so nice to just, the cast was a mix between known professional actors like Saleh and Nadine, and for example, Tala, who plays the teenager, it was her first fiction film. She usually works in TV. The grandmother has never acted before. Reem is actually played by two girls, two twins. Sayana and Gianna played the role of Reem, and they've never acted before. And they for me was a huge, revelation, because Reem was a little bit my alter ego. I had a lot, like I saw so many kids, and kids are all adorable, but every time someone left the casting session, I went back home and I thought, no, I have to feel something. I have to know right away. It has to be like that, Sometimes it's not love at first sight, but for Reem, somehow my gut told me it has to be. And so one day the casting director showed me a video of a girl, and she had blue eyes like the father, which was always my dream, to have a Reem that would be like the copy paste of Saleh and Tala of Nadine. And so I fell in love with this girl on the video, and the casting director revealed to me that she was actually a twin, and there was two of them. So both of them came to the office at a moment where, like the office, we were still fixing the windows in the office. There was this general atmosphere of grief during that part of the production. And these two girls enter full of life, full of their ray of sunshines, like completely insane in the best ways, no filter, no, and I completely fall in love with both of them, because each of them had character traits of the character that the other didn't. I had never worked with twins for one role, so I did it very intuitively. I just did it because I loved both of them, and I divided the scenes in the script based on their personalities. And it was a very, very organic process, because I think when you don't know something, you just react to it instinctively. And it was just great. One would get tired, the other one would come. I would get more shooting hours.
Yeah, it really shows it. It really feels like you're looking at a real family. And
yes, and
I really loved it.
No, and I think because it was hard during a pandemic to get them to spend a lot of time together, but so we didn't do a lot of rehearsals with the whole family. It was quite like, I wouldn't do that again. I think it's so important to really live with your characters, like move to a house together for a little bit. but these were the circumstances of the pandemic. But what was great is that the chemistry took very little time to really catch fire, and I think by the second day of the shoot, it already felt like so much had been built already. And so we shot one of the first family scenes at the end of the shoot. That was a very smart thing to do, because it's in the beginning of the film. And also I think that the time they spent with the costume designer Beatrice, getting to know the characters through their clothes, their objects, spending all this time together, because it's a family that rotates clothes within the circular economy. They haven't been doing any shopping. I think that also, all those little details added to their connection with each other.
Yeah, it really shows. I think I've lied to you before, because I have another last question, which is there another film or project coming up?
Yes, I am working on a new film, which I am at the early stages of in the script. I have a version that is evolving, and it's exploring again like themes that basically, like we're kind of like tucked in somewhere in my body, and now are making their way now that Costa Brava is out. I think that when I look at Costa Brava, I look at all the things I wish I would have done if I was who I am today. And I think that's what will be in the next film. I'm also working on a TV show with a team in the US, and developing ideas with some colleagues. And also sometimes for fun and to keep the creative muscles active, I collaborate with designers or architects, and whether it's for fashion films or architecture films. This is something that takes little of my time, but keeps my imagination active, because these are projects in which you can create images that are just intuitive without the whole production that, it's just quicker and more playful. So sometimes I do that, but the main focus is on those two new projects.
Okay, I'm looking forward to see the next film, but let's start with this one. Thank you very much for this talk.
Thank you. I wish I was with you in the room.
Yes, same here.